This is the Your Career Story podcast, and you're listening to episode 60. Yes, it's possible to be confident and assertive without being labeled a BIA. Here's how. Welcome to Your Career Story podcast, a show that's designed for rockstar professionals looking for that extra booster shot of confidence in their careers. Whether you're trying to get clarity on a job transition, want some work-life balance inspiration, or need a strategy to snag that promotion or raise, this podcast is for you. I'm your host, Jena, ex-Wall Streeter turned startup junkie who now coaches hundreds of clients, empowering them to take back control of the job search and land their dream job. So sit back, grab a glass of wine, and prepare yourself for your weekly boost of career confidence. Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Your Career Story podcast. I am so excited to be with you here today, wherever you are quarantining from. So if you checked out the title, there is a profanity, quote unquote, in it. So I am actually not going to say the profane word, the swear word, if you will. I'm going to take this back to very PG and call it a BIA. It's a common word that we use for women, unfortunately, when they are confident and assertive. And I just want to show you today that that is not possible. The reason why I'm not using the actual word is because then I have to make my whole entire podcast through Apple's requirements say that it's an explicit podcast, which it's not. So I'm just going to use the word BIA the entire time. So hopefully that's not very confusing for you guys. But I really felt very strongly about talking about this topic. I hear this a lot from the women I work with in my Recruit the Employer program, but just, in the airwaves, on the internet, where women are really struggling with how do I come across as being confident, but not being labeled as somebody who's maybe too bossy or a BIA or some other terrible connotation and word that's being used oftentimes in the workplace that there's really a gender discrepancy, right? Like we can admit that this is an unconscious bias, sometimes a purposeful bias between men and women in the workplace. And so how do we handle that? How do we show up authentically as ourselves, not get over obsessive about how we're talking about things, but really show up as authentic, strong women that we are? If you're listening to this podcast, my guess is that you want to be perceived as that. You want to live out of that, but maybe you just don't have any idea of how to do that. So I'm going to walk you through some tips that I have, some ways that I coach my women on in the Recruit the Employer program through this kind of thought process of how do you come across as somebody who's strong and confident, but not get labeled something that doesn't represent who you are. So we first need to, set the stage that there is an unconscious bias going on right now. Like we do know that men and women are treated differently in the workplace. There's different perceptions that are placed on women. There's different perceptions that are placed on men. Some things are more acceptable for men to do than women to do. They're all the different places. We could talk about that till the sun comes, up again a new day, or we're done with the coronavirus. Like we could be talking about this forever. That is not the purpose of this podcast. I'm not a huge fan of belaboring what's already been belabored. I'm going to acknowledge it, say that that does happen. Okay, now how do we move through it? How do we move to the other side so that we don't just become a bunch of complainers and just talk about how things are bad, but actually put some actions in place to make sure that we are doing our part to show up and stand firm, even when other people around us may not be. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. I hope you're okay with that. This is not going to be something where we're going to do a man bashing session. That's not what I'm about. But I'm really going to give you some tactics and some tools and some things to be thinking through that you can control, that you can take action on. And it's not going to be around, what's wrong with society. Because again, we could talk about that for days and hours, and that doesn't really solve any problems. So let's first talk about when thinking about confidence and being assertive in your career. I think one of the first things that women don't even really do in the first place is they kind of overextend themselves because they really don't know where they're going, right? So we can actually, I've seen a lot of women lately, and I see this all the time. I see it on Instagram. It just makes me go cringy, where we've become this society where we've seen this bias and we go to the totally different end of the spectrum and we have to overexert ourselves and overcompensate. And I hate that. I hate that for women because it's still operating out of a place that is not peaceful. And so I want you to have a strong inner confidence that's not wavered by anything that comes your way. And that's what I want for you, not an overcompensation because you want to prove a man wrong or anything like that. So what I first want you to identify is, are you truly confident in yourself, in your capabilities, and what you have to offer to the world? Are you at peace with that? Or are you trying to make up for what maybe people have said about you in the past? I know that for myself, that has often been a narrative for me where I'm trying to prove myself, or I'm trying to do a brand of confidence that's not actually true and at peace. And true confidence is not really caring what other people think about you. Where I think a lot of women have now operated into this, I'm going to muster up myself and I'm going to be assertive and I'm going to, and it comes off wrong. It comes off actually not confident, and it leaves us still in the dust. So we're going to talk today about how to be truly, truly confident in inner confidence that then comes to an external confidence. I get a lot of people who come through my program, and at the end they say, Jena, you taught me how to get a job, and I got a job and I got a raise, but you really just taught me how to be truly confident in myself and my skills and my capabilities, and for me to show up as if I'm worth it and operate from that, not in an overcompensating way, but in a truly peaceful way. And that for me is a 1.5. So let's talk a little bit about where you currently are on the spectrum. If you think about yourself, you think about where you are in your career and how you've operated in your career, do you find yourself overextending or overcompensating for, people that maybe have mistreated you, or you're not treated well and you're trying to overcompensate? Or are you just completely laying over here and just like letting things happen to you and you're just a victim? Like, where are you on the spectrum? I want you to be somewhere in the middle. So I want you to take an audit of yourself first. Where are you on that spectrum? And in order for you to be confident, typically the reason why we enter into one of those spectrums is because we don't truly know what we want in our lives. We don't truly know what we're made for. We don't know our purpose. We don't have our vision for our careers, and we can't stand strongly in that. I see total overhauls of women and their confidence level when they actually decide and know what they want and then move forward in that. And they aren't worried about what the left or the right's doing. I've even seen that for myself in my career, right? If I'm looking left and right, I can say that for my business. I've been going through a season where that has been true for me. I've been not living out of a confident state. I've been living out of what's going on the left, what's going on in the right. Do I need to overcompensate in some way? And that is just like the recipe for burnout, emotional burnout, right? So I want you to first take that audit, understand where are you feeling, whether you're feeling victim or like you're overcompensating, and what is the narrative you're telling yourself about in your career? What are the limiting beliefs potentially you're having right now? And what is the mission that you actually want to have in your career? You need to ask yourself this question. I talked about this last week, that this is the perfect time for a reflection in your career. Are you going where you want to be going? Are you heading in the right direction? Is this what you want for your career? If it's not, how can we start making some steps to move you in a different way, to make a pivot, to make a change? It's possible. I've seen hundreds of people do it. I've seen women do it. I've seen men do it. I've seen new grads. I've seen people that are in their 50s do it. So there is no excuse if you're trying to make a career pivot. You can do it, I promise you. But you got to know where you're going first. So you have to know what you want. You have to know where you're going. You have to know what your mission and vision is. If you need help with that, hire somebody. Don't try to do it yourself. You're going to stay stuck for long. I've learned that the hard way. And the other thing that I want you to think about, so once you've decided, like, what's my mission? What is my vision for my career? And for the record, that can change. It doesn't have to stay the same thing over time. We've seen new technologies come into play. We're seeing the coronavirus happen. It may make you think differently about where you've been going. And if you actually want to keep on that path, it's okay to change it over the long haul. But just know that where you have a direction, right? You're not wandering around aimlessly. You know what your current personal brand is. You know what you are about in your mission, similar to how maybe your company has a mission statement and value system. You need to have one yourself too. You need to know where you're going. And that is where we start really understanding, okay, how can we actually be truly confident? Because we know who we are, we know where we're going, we know what we want. That's the first step. If you're not doing that and you're feeling like really panicked about your confidence level, and it's probably because you don't know who you are and what you're doing. So I would make sure you do some deep work around this. This doesn't happen overnight. I'm sorry to tell you, there's not a 5-step plan to make that happen quickly. You got to go through the process of unraveling the things that you've learned for a long time and reinstating some truths about who you are and what you want, right? The other thing that I want to talk about is there is a difference, and I mention this a lot with the women that are in my Recruit the Employer group. There is a difference between speaking matter-of-factly about your skills and your capabilities in a confident way and arrogance. If you're worried about arrogance, you probably don't have to worry about it. So I make this joke that women really care about being perceived as humble. It's the whole perception thing. Totally get that. You want to actually be truly humble, not the perception of humble. So that's the first part. The second piece is and I'm going to share with you a way of matter-of-factly going through what your skills and your capabilities are. Typically, it comes up in an interview. Typically, it comes up in a networking conversation where you can matter-of-factly say, this is what I'm good at and I'm proud of that. Because the reality is you were born with a certain skill set. Your skill set is very different than my skill set. And so when we acknowledge that we're born with different skill sets, we can also acknowledge that we are not responsible for those skills. So therefore, they've been a gift to us. For me, I believe that the Lord has gifted me. So whether you believe in God or whatever that looks like for you, I am a Jesus follower. That's no surprise to anyone that's listening to this, but I believe that God gifted me with a certain number of characteristics. He also didn't gift me with another set of characteristics. So I can fully walk into those gifts and fully hone those and acknowledge that, yes, I'm in the process of honing those, but those were not mine. Like I didn't craft those. God gifted those things to me. And so I'm going to be a good steward of those gifts. And me stating what gifts I have is just a matter-of-fact statement. And things that I have done in my past and how I've honed those skills, it's matter of fact. It's not a braggadocious comment. So I just want to clear that part up because I think a lot of women get hung up around matter-of-factly stating what they're good at and being worried about being arrogant. Typically, if you're worried about that, you don't have to worry about that. So I just wanted to clear the air on that first before we go into the next thing. The other thing that I want to talk about before we actually get into kind of some tips around it. So knowing where you want to go, knowing that there's a difference between matter-of-factness versus arrogance. You probably don't have to worry about it again if you are worried about being arrogant. And then the last piece is I have a love-hate relationship with the phrase, what would a man do? On one hand, I love that phrase because I think it helps us think differently. I was working with a client recently and she was saying to me, she was talking to a friend and was doing a networking situation. And one of the notes that she had from there was the mentor told her, what would a man do? He would be networking right now. He wouldn't be taking no for an answer. He would, and those things are true. So I love that. It's a good checkpoint for us to be like, is Amanda going to negotiate his salary? Okay, I should negotiate mine too. There's no reason for me not to. On the other hand, I hate that phrase because we're not men. If you're listening to this, you're probably a female professional looking to advance in her career and you're trying to make some strategic career moves and you want to know how to do it really well and be authentic to you. The thing is, you're not a man. And so there are different, I don't want to force you to become some like super masculine version of yourself that's not authentic to who you are. So I think we have to be careful with that phrasing. So when you hear that phrasing from other people, what would a man do? Take it at face value, but don't go a level deeper because you are still you are not a man. So I just want to encourage you, if you feel that tension and that pressure, I know that I definitely felt that as a woman in the modern working world with women who have gone before me and worked in corporate, it was my responsibility to really stand up and, fight the man, whatever that looks like. That's not authentic to who I am. It doesn't feel good for me. And so I'm guessing if you're listening to this, it probably doesn't feel good for you. So I'm freeing you of that expectation to be that kind of thinking about what a man would do. I want you to think about, what would you do? That's the better question to ask. What would you do? What would the most authentic, confident version of yourself do? What would she do? And then do that, not what would the man do. So I think about that all the time. What would the most authentic, freedom-focused, peace-filled Jena, what would she do in this situation? And when I'm operating from that, which is, you have to check yourself regularly to make sure you are, then I'm probably making better decisions in my life. I'm operating and more confident. I'm putting myself out there. I'm not worried about rejection. I'm not fearing failure. I'm confidently stepping into my gifts and I'm asserting those in a way that's humble and kind. And so I believe that the same thing can be true for you. So hopefully that's a good framework for us. Now a perfect segue into the first tip that I have for you. So how to be confident and assertive without being labeled a Bia in the workplace. Let me guess. If you're listening to this podcast, you're probably not looking for any job. You're looking for the right job. And the right job is not at your current company. You're tired of feeling underpaid, overworked, and like your career is in the hands of the employer. You're ready to make some moves, but you're overwhelmed by all of the options. You don't know how to sell yourself, and you have a nagging feeling that your lack of confidence is keeping you from success, not to mention negotiating the amount you're worth. If this sounds like you and you're a mid to senior level career woman who makes over $100,000, we have a 4-step solution just for you. Our signature program, Recruit the Employer, is designed to help women leaders get clarity on what they want to do, market to their dream jobs, and negotiate thousands more. Using a personal branded approach, we equip you with the tools to sell yourself in a non-sleazy way, think like a C-suite leader, and ultimately take back control of your career. To apply, head on over to www.geneviviano.com/apply. Over the course of 12 weeks, you'll network with other female leaders at similar stages, learn how to double your salary, and solidify your career story. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention, the dreaded resume and LinkedIn profile? Yeah, we do that for you. Because of the intimate nature of this program and limited spots, we are very selective about who we invite into the program. To see if you'd be a good fit, again, head on over to www.jenaviviano.com/apply to apply to recruit the employer today. We can't wait to support you. All right, back to the episode. The first thing is I want you to be yourself. I was talking with one of my clients that is in the Recruit the Employer program, and she said, one of the things that I always get feedback on and she deemed this as negative, is that I'm so smiley. Smiley, that's a great thing. You're smiling, you're friendly, like you are allowed to be those things. And she kept on perceiving it as a negative thing. And I think that there has been some negative connotations for females in the workplace that if you're too smiley, you're not going to be taken seriously. But at the same time, if you're too masculine, too aggressive, then you are going to be labeled as a Bia. So here's my recommendation. Throw all of that out of the water. And I want you to think about the most authentic version of you when you're around your friends, when you feel most yourself. Who are you? For me, I could never be a super aggressive, masculine person. If I tried to lean into that, I knew that I was not going to be my most confident self. I was overexerting, or I was overcompensating for what I thought the narrative was supposed to be. I was always, when I lived in New York City and I worked at the New York Stock Exchange and I worked in investment banking, I was smiley. And I never apologized for that. And maybe some people didn't take me seriously, but I didn't really care. For me, it was more important that I lived out who I truly was, that I showed empathy. I was recently watching, if you're familiar with Masterclass, it's a fabulous new streaming service. It's kind of like LinkedIn Learning, but it's specifically with thought leaders covers everything from like interior designers, and it has all these celebrities basically that teach you their craft. So you have Anna Wintour, the editor-in-chief of Vogue, talking about her skill set. And I was watching the one around Sarah Blakely. And so all of y'all know that I love Sarah Blakely. I think she's a genius. And she said that she wanted to, one of the best videos I heard her talk about was she wanted to do business differently. Someone came up to her at a party and heard that she had started her business. This is in the very early days. And it was a man. And he said, business is war. And his friend goes, yeah, business is war. Good luck. And she's like, no, I don't want that to be my life. Like, I want to do this differently. And I think that we can do business differently. And I want to express both the masculine and the feminine. And I think that that is what I'm trying to get at here is like, be yourself. If you're direct, be direct. Obviously, you need to check yourself if you're being too direct and people are being offended by you just in general. Or if you smile at work, smile at work. It's not a big deal. So I don't want you to get in your head about how should I act. I want you to think about who am I? How do I normally act? What do I need to refine the edges on? So like I said, sometimes I'm working with some clients who are a little bit too direct in the delivery, and they're direct with me. And so it can come across as negative, and I do this with both men and women. It happens for both men and women. It's not just one or the other. It's really learning how to communicate effectively, and you can still be direct and to the point without being rude and condescending, which often happens sometimes when you're direct. So just be the best version of yourself. So if you're typically direct, just make sure that there's a refined edge there. If you're smelly, make sure you're also being assertive. So just recognize both ends of the spectrum and understand what you have to offer and the value that you bring. We talk about this a lot in my Recruit the Employer is what is the value that you have to bring? What do you have to offer? How do you show up as your whole self and really identifying that person and then entering into conversations out of that? So first tip is be yourself, marrying the feminine and the masculine. The second tip that I have is advocate for yourself. So this practically looks like speaking up in a meeting. So I actually commissioned a couple of my clients who were telling me that they get worried about what they're going to say before they speak up at a meeting. And for me, when I was young, I don't think I really worried about this, to be perfectly honest, because I was confident that I would say something that was going to be valuable to someone. And I wanted to make sure that I was heard, not in a way just like I was saying something just because I wanted to get heard, but because I had something to add of value. If you are speaking up if you want to speak up in a meeting because you know you have something of value to add, speak up. Don't let the kind of naysayers in your brain worry about what everybody else is thinking. That is the worst thing that you can do that's going to keep you hold you back and not allow you to enter into your most confident self. So I want you to speak up for yourself in a meeting. I want you to give your thoughts and opinions. And I think opinions is a kind of a funny word too, because again, it could go into the overcompensating side of things. Give your perception based off of your expertise grounded in context and facts. And when you can show up to a meeting and provide that type of value and make sure that you're heard in a way, not just to hear your voice, but to really add something to the conversation, do it. We need to hear your voice. Your voice needs to be heard in your company. And you are doing yourself a disservice by not doing that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I want you to ask for promotion. So if you've been at your company for a while and you're seeing some new opportunities and you want to grow within, you need to ask for the promotion. You need to not wait for somebody to come along for you and tell you what you should be doing. Same thing holds true. If you want to get a promotion and you're seeing some opportunities to do some of the work without the title, do the work. So I have one of my clients and she is amazing. She said one of her, and we talked about this actually in the Success Secrets of 100K Women. It's one of the past podcast episodes. She was talking about how she actually did work before she had the title to prove that she could do the work and to use it as a part of her case when she asked for her promotion. So I want you to think about it for yourself. Where should you advocate for yourself in your career as it relates to your career trajectory? Maybe it looks like switching jobs. Those are some ways that you're going to start to build your confidence if you start doing these little things. So you are able to, it kind of compounds upon itself. So every meeting you stand up and say something in, every time you advocate for yourself in a annual review, anytime you ask for a raise or a negotiation, you are depositing confidence blocks into your bag. I don't know how else to put it. You are depositing that kind of confidence booster shop in yourself. And so I want you to really think about how can you advocate for yourself? How can you ask for that promotion? How can you negotiate and make sure that you are speaking up and being heard in a way that's value add? The other thing that I want you to think about, this is kind of a subtext or kind of a sub bullet, if you will, is make sure you aren't being perceived as kind of the helper. So I'm going to say this with kind of a caveat, if you will, which we're actually going to talk about stop with the caveats next. But I want to make sure that you're understanding what I'm saying here. So I had a client recently and she is amazing. She's so skilled at what she does. She has so many great ideas that are strategic, high level thinking, but she has become so good at being the person who puts out all the fires. She has cornered herself there. And I have seen that happen with so many of my female clients that she ends up just being the person who's helping out, the help, versus somebody who's actually in charge, actually has her opinions heard, actually is able to assert herself. So part of it is practicing and part of it is making sure that you're not positioning yourself as being so good as the queen of putting out fires that you're only seen as the queen of putting out fires. I think too many women put themselves in that position. It's really hard to break out of that and advocate for yourself if you're just being seen as that. So just make sure, take it like a little bit of a survey. Do you add some value in a strategic way? Do you have ideas? Do you bring them to the table? Are you heard? Are you making sure that you're advocating for yourself? Because the reality is if you aren't your own career advocate, your own career hero, nobody else will be. So you've got to be that for yourself. The next thing that I want to talk about is stopping with a caveat. So I hear this with a lot of women, and I actually think that women don't have trouble, like I said, with being too assertive when they're being labeled a BIA, it's more again that overcompensation is really what's happening if they're being labeled that. Typically speaking, I'm going to say 9 times out of 10, I know there's always an exception to the rule, but 9 times out of 10, I'm seeing that women are actually struggling more with being confident and being assertive and standing up for themselves than they are with being labeled as a BIA because they fear that label. The reality is most of you don't have to worry about that because you have both the feminine and the masculine. If you manage both of those really well and you oscillate between the two, you can be matter of fact, you can be confident, you can share your gifts and your talents in a way that's humble and kind. So part of that is stopping with the caveats. One of the things that destroys your confidence or could destroy your potential of being seen as a leader is you're so worried about being too much and not enough all at the same time. I can so relate to this. I relate to this in my personal life for a very long time, but I also related to it in my professional life. I always felt like I was too much and also not enough at the same time. I was feeling like I was too creative, but not really analytical enough. Or I was maybe too forward about something and not really introspective enough about something. There's always some kind of like pendulum I was swinging on that I felt really frustrated. And I'm sure if you're listening to this, you probably felt that too sometime in your career. So I want you to notice, the first thing is the self-awareness. Notice when you are entering into the too much and not enough conversation in your brain. You got to notice that. You got to quench it. You got to notice and quench it. It's going to be a continual process. And over time, you'll start to move out of that. I know for myself, I have. For the most part, I would say it still pops up every now and again if I'm super stressed about stuff. But for the most part, I want you to be thinking about, when am I telling myself I'm too much and not enough all at the same time? Why is that the narrative I keep telling myself? The next thing I want you to do is make sure that you're not saying I'm sorry all the time. My friend Micah, she was actually on one of our podcast episodes talking about sales and startup success, because she's a sales leader at the Muse, actually. Her and I are good friends. And she came to visit me in Nashville. And we were just hanging out. It was Valentine's Day last year. We both were single, and we were just having a really good time. And she goes, you've said I'm sorry a zillion times. I don't know if that's just a Southern thing, but you've said I'm sorry so many times. And I didn't realize how much I qualified. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. And I use that phrase so much. And I see it with the women that are in my group. They say, I'm sorry, and apologize versus just giving context. Context is not necessarily giving excuses. If you're trying to explain yourself, the apologies don't need to happen. Like, women apologize more than men do. This is a fact. And you need to eradicate I'm sorry unless you truly mean that you are actually sorry because maybe you hurt somebody, you really upset somebody. Like, that is an appropriate time for I'm sorry. I'm sorry is not an appropriate phrase to use when you're like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to send you that email. Like, no, that's just, you use it too much. Most women use it too much and out of context. So giving context to something is helpful, but don't make sure you lean into it as an excuse. So I also just see so many women using kind of caveats to explain certain things, or just kind of belittle themselves first versus just stating a matter-of-fact way of phrasing something. So I want you to just be aware of how many times you say I'm sorry, just because you might be shocked at how many times you say it, because you really don't need to be sorry for all these different things. You maybe have to be sorry for maybe one thing in a day. It just might be a different direction you're taking something, or you're trying to rephrase something, or you're giving context around something. Just quit saying I'm sorry so much. And then finally, let's talk about if you are being labeled and called a BIA. How do you approach that? How do you address that? How do you make sure that, so hopefully we've covered a lot of things, right? We've covered out how to advocate for yourself, how to stop with the caveats, how to really enter into a peaceful way of confidence. And then if you're truly living out of that, you're probably never going to be labeled a BIA. But let's say that you are, right? Let's say you're yourself and you're still being labeled a BIA. The first thing that I want you to enter into is what I call the feminine power tool, our empathy. So I want you to empathize with the person. I know that's so hard. If your boss, who's maybe a male and is like calling you a BIA behind your back because you've been assertive or you've been confident and really said your piece about something, that you are a BIA, how do you enter into that empathy? It's very hard, but I need you to enter into that and understand what's going on with them. Are they feeling intimidated by me? Are they feeling like are they having a really bad day? Is something going on with them? Is their boss putting a lot of pressure on them? How do you enter into that first with empathy? I think that's super important. Then you have to ask yourself the honest question, because we're a humble group here, right? We want to make sure that we don't have anything, that we are not necessarily don't have anything to work on, because we always have things to work on, but that we're recognizing when we ourselves need to grow. Right? So we need to ask ourselves our question, was I actually being a BIA in that moment? Was I having what was the motivation behind that interaction? Was I actually trying to overcompensate, which usually is in BIA land? Or was I truly just operating in matter-of-factly coming into a conversation and they couldn't handle it? That's a them problem. That's not a me problem. So I need you to first hit empathy. Then I need you to also ask yourself the question, what were my motivations, and be honest with yourself about those. I think too many women are using the excuse of men are just sexist and are using that almost to like their disadvantage, where you're not growing, you're not learning that potentially you could have some room to grow as well. I know that's true for me. I can grow in a million different directions. So just recognize if you need to grow yourself, and then you need to let it go. Step 1, empathy. Step 2, recognize where you need to grow. And step 3 is let it go. It is a them problem. It is not a you problem. If you address it, if you apologize, this is when apology is actually appropriate. If you recognize that you were being inappropriate, your motivation was not there. But then if they don't accept that, it's a them problem. That is not a you problem. Or if you realize that it really wasn't your fault, that you truly came into it with an authentic conversation, you were kind, you were confident, that's a them problem. That is not a you problem. So I just want to encourage you in this, that I hate this conversation, that we're even having to have this conversation right now. But my prayer and my hope is that you feel confident that you start to lean into that inner confidence, that you start to lean into being assertive in a non-aggressive way. I think it's totally possible. I think many women are doing it really well. We're just hearing this narrative so much more. So it makes women afraid to be confident and assertive because they're so fearful of being labeled this be a character that I feel like we have demonized in the corporate workplace. I feel also that many men actually don't ascribe to that, and we just hear the negative. It's kind of like why I don't watch the news that much right now. You're only going to tell me all the negative things. What about all the positive things? I started only reading the positive news because it's not really that helpful to hear all of the news because it's always so negative. Same thing holds true in this. I think there's a lot more people that are living out of that confidence space. And I'm going to encourage you to do the same thing. So honestly, guys, this starts one person at a time. You change a society one person at a time. You don't do it all at once. And you don't do it by complaining about it. You do it by controlling what you can control and then moving forward. So hopefully this was an action-packed episode for you that you feel encouraged, you feel inspired. You're really going to reflect on your own kind of experience where you are at the workplace, where this shows up, and where you can be also honest with yourself about where you are in that confidence spectrum. I think it's so important that I would love to hear what your takeaway is. So if you are listening to this and you're feeling inspired to reach out to me on LinkedIn, I would love to hear from you, or Instagram. I'm available in both places. I would love to hear what you got away from this conversation or what you feel like has been most impactful for you. And I would share it with a friend who maybe needs to hear it. Another friend who is like, I'm so scared to be confident in my career because I'm afraid I'm going to be perceived as something totally different. And I want to encourage you that it's possible to be confident and not be labeled that. It is possible that more and more companies are aware of this kind of behavior, and there's some tools that you can deal with to really address it, but then also just to encourage you to stay in that confident space. So hope this was helpful. I can't wait to see you guys next week. And until then. Hey, y'all, thanks so much for listening to Your Career Story podcast. I would love to get to meet you. And there are a couple of ways that we can connect in between episodes. First and foremost, you know I love my LinkedIn. Second is via Instagram. And third is over on my website. I actually have a special spot just for you full of fun, free resources. So all you have to do is go to www.jenaviviano.com/resources. Super simple, for a bunch of freebies that will help you boost your career. Hope to see you next week.